Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this video is going to be on React, specifically on the useEffect hook and making API calls in React. So first things first, what we're going to do is discuss the useEffect hook. So we're going to spin up a new React project, and so I'll just go right here to terminal. Let's actually create a new terminal. Okay, so that way I'm in my React folder. And I'm going to do npx create react app and create react app. We're going to call this useEffect and cats. Okay. And we'll just wait for that to get generated. But essentially what we're going to do is first we're just going to just kind of establish what the useEffect hook does, because the name doesn't make it really clear what it does. I mean, if you're very familiar with sort of esoteric programming terminology and you understand what side effects are and functions and things like that and closure, then yeah, maybe the name means something to you, but probably for the majority of people it does not. It's not quite as intuitive as, let's say, as much as I'm not a big fan of the class syntax for React components, things like the lifecycle hooks make a lot more sense, saying, okay, hey, this thing happens before the component renders, this happens after the component's removed, having these events that occur at different points in time. useEffect kind of bundles all of that into one thing that works, but can sometimes be a little not intuitive. So let's talk about it. So let's just do the usual. I'm going to go into the folder, cd useEffect and cats. I'm going to start the server and npm start. And there we go. Okay, so there's our basic React project. I'm going to move this off to the side. And I'm going to move this off to the side. I don't really need this to have too much space. So we'll just do it like that. And let's go to my app.js and clear it out. Okay. Now, bottom line is this. What I want to kind of exemplify is that your component is a function. Okay, if you're writing functional components, or if it's a class with a render function. But the bottom line, and if you hear sounds in the background, I do live in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is quite filled with sounds, especially since I don't live too far from a hospital. But hopefully I'll be in Florida soon enough, and you won't hear all that. But the thing is that anytime the state changes, the component, this function, runs again. Okay, so let's examine this. So if I were to say, just to kind of illustrate the point, let's create some state, const, and I need to import the useEffect hook. And if you haven't seen my videos on the useEffect hook, use state hook, you should probably watch those first. So import use state, we might as well import useEffect while we're at it, from React. Cool. So those are the hooks I need. Okay. And hooks always start with the word use. Actually, the React syntax actually looks for the word use and treats it in a slightly different way. But I'm going to create some state. So right over here. So const, we'll just call it state, set state equals useEffect. Not useEffect, use state. And then we'll just make it an empty object. Okay, and the reason why I'm using an empty object is that every object is unique. Every time you create a new object, it's treated as a separate thing. And the thing about state is that you always need to pass it a new thing to trigger a re-render. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so let me just make a button. Okay, click me is what the button says, and we're going to say state on click. So whenever we click on this button, this following function will run. So I'll just sit there and say, hey, whenever this button is clicked, we're going to run a function that uses the set state function to set the state to another empty object. Now you're thinking, wait a second, an empty object is the same as an empty object. It is not in JavaScript. Arrays and objects are unique every time. Okay, this is the difference between sort of references and values. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I highly recommend watching a video either from me or someone else about referential quality. Just look up like JavaScript reference versus value. It'll explain the difference. But the bottom line is that objects and arrays are references. So every new array is a different reference to where that data is stored in memory, while like numbers, booleans, and strings are primitives where they're actual data stored in memory. So there's a difference in what's being compared under the hood. So in this case, we're comparing this reference to this reference. We're not comparing the data in the object, but the actual memory reference that the object represents. So in this case, it's saying, hey, is this object the same as that object when we update the state? And that's when it determines whether it's a re-render. So if I open this up, Control Shift I, oops, I want to open up DevTools in the browser, go to the console. So if I were to put a console log in this component, console.log, hello. See, that happens the first time because the component renders the first time, which runs this whole function, and that console log's inside the function, so that line runs. And then if I click this button, see, it runs again because this function's rerunning, and it is re-rendering because this object is not the same as this object, because again, every object is unique. So if I keep clicking this, that console log keeps happening. So you can see there it's like happened several times. Now if I change this to the number 1, so it starts out as 1 and I keep changing it to 1, 1 does equal 1. Okay, 1 is the value and 1 is going to still be the value. Here you won't necessarily see the number, so let me clear the console. Let me refresh the page actually. Okay, so there's the initial hello. Okay. And if I keep clicking click me, see there's no update. Why? Because when we update the state, it's going to compare 1 to 1. Notice there's no change, and it will not rebuild the UI. Okay, so again, just to demonstrate referential equality versus value. So same thing for numbers and strings. We're actually comparing like what they are, while when it's an object, even if I wrote like, it doesn't matter what's inside the object, an object is always unique. A new set of curly brackets is always a unique object. So in this case, every time it triggers a render. Okay, I know that's sort of a bit of an aside, but I want you to kind of appreciate why I'm putting the empty object there right now. Okay, cool. So now watch what happens if I do this. Okay, what if I said that when you click this button, okay, also I were to kind of write a function, so we'll say const func equals a function, and what this function does is set the state. And it sets the state to an empty object again. Okay. And then I were to run that function in the body of the function. Now, again, keep in mind that everything in the function is going to run every time this component is rendered. So if I run this function that changes the state in the body of the function, watch what happens. Okay, I'm getting this error. Okay. And the reason is, what does the error say? It says too many re-renders. Okay, because you notice like really quickly, I already had 25 hellos. Now if I refresh this page, I'll get it again, but just so you can see 25 hellos. Why? Because the minute the page loaded, this function ran, it set the state, which caused the function to re-render, which ran this function again, which caused the state to update again and re-render. So it creates this infinite loop. Okay, it creates this infinite loop. So the idea is that there may be things that we may want to run that function when our component loads, but the problem is if we put that function in the body of our component, then it's going to run every time, creating this infinite loop. So we want to prevent that. This is where useEffect comes in. Okay, so I would say useEffect, and then useEffect gets a function. Okay, so that's the first argument, saying, hey, I want you to do this, but not every time. Okay, so what's going to happen here is I'll call func inside of here. Let me refresh this. There we go. Okay, and now notice, see, like, hello happens. Let me just refresh this page. Oh, it's still happening forever. Let me 1 second. Why is that the case? Yeah, let me restart the server. Okay. And let's start. Okay, now let me open up the DevTools. It's still happening. Oh yeah, I know why. Okay, so the first argument is the function. So this is the function that's going to run, but then the second argument has to be like, when does it rerun? So I have to pass in that second argument. Okay, and that second argument is an empty array. So we'll start off with an empty array. Let me just want to clear this terminal. Oh, but this thing's already kind of frozen. Okay, so let's do that and terminate this, because these windows are just kind of stuck doing what they're doing. And that's why you want to be careful of creating infinite loops. But the idea is that this function is going to run when the component loads, and anytime anything in this array changes. There's nothing in the array, so it's not monitoring anything, so it'll never rerun again. Okay, so let's start that server again. Okay, so there it is. Let's open up the DevTools. Okay, notice this time you're not seeing like that, all these numbers climb up like before. See, it ran like once and that was it. Cool. And if I refresh it, you know, it console logs twice because there's some wacky things about how React re-renders, but the idea is that it only ran once. Okay, it's not running every time the component renders. So if I keep clicking this button, okay, it's still... Oh, that's because... Oh, it's because I have this console log here. Okay, so I need to get rid of that. Okay, but at least I'm not creating the infinite loop anymore. Okay, so if I were to now put this console log inside the useEffect, console log hello, now watch what happens. I reload the page, I update the state, but the hello doesn't happen again, because this function right here will only run if something in here changes. So that's the beauty of the useEffect hook. Anything you put in here will happen when the component loads the first time, but it will not automatically happen on every additional render. So things that you only need to happen some of the time should happen in here, in a useEffect. And you can have as many useEffects as you want. So usually if you have like a useEffect that's dependent, let's say you have like 3 different pieces of state, so you have like 5 of these or something, okay, or 3 or whatever. And the thing you want only needs to happen when one of them updates. You would do that thing in a useEffect, so you would put that in the function of the useEffect, and then you would put that state, so I would put like state here in the dependency array. So if I write state here, now anytime the state changes, it's going to update. Now I created the infinite loop again. So let me get rid of this func here. Yep, I already killed this browser. Oh, localhost 3000. Okay. Control-Shift-I. Okay. So now the console log. So see, it console logs when the page loads, but now since it's monitoring the state, and the state's going to update every time I click the button, it's going to cause this function to run again, because I said, hey, run it again anytime the state changes. Okay, but if I were to create a second piece of state, let's say I create a second piece of state, Control-C, and we'll say this one is state 2. Oops. State 2, and I create another button. And we'll just say here is state 2. Okay. So now notice, again, our useEffect says run this function once right away. So there it is. Ran the function once. And it's going to run it when this changes. So if I click on the first button, which changes the first state, that console log runs again. But if I click on the second button, which changes this state, which is not in the dependency array, okay, it's not doing anything. And just to confirm that, I'll create another console log that is in the body of the component. So it's in the body, not in the useEffect. So that means it should happen every time. Okay, we'll call it cheese. Okay, refresh the page. See, both of them happen at the very beginning because this function's running. So this is going to run, and the useEffect's going to run once. If I click on the first one, state 1, state is in the dependency array, so it'll trigger the useEffect. And again, this is going to happen anyways because it's a separate render. So see, both happen again. But if I click me to, which is changing this state, it won't. So watch, boop, and see, only cheese happens. So that's what useEffect does. It says this thing only happens when this thing changes. Okay. And if there's nothing in the array, it'll only happen when the page loads. There's also this other aspect that if this function here returns another function, that function will run when the component is removed from the screen. But that's not, you probably won't use that all that often. And if you get to the point in your life where you do need it, you'll probably understand why you need it at that point. So the main thing is getting this sort of basic, like it happens on load and on these particular updates. That's what the useEffect does. Okay, so now that we know what useEffect does, we can now talk about the API call. Okay, because I didn't want to create an infinite loop with an API call, because then APIs like shut you down because you gave them way too many calls. So I just want to kind of illustrate the idea. So what if I want to make an API call? The typical patterns, like let's say you want to say, hey, I want to show a photo, right? So let's create a state for image. Const image set image. Okay. Set, and then we're going to create another use state, another state, except this will start out as some picture. So let me go to images.google.com. Get an image of a cat. Okay, there's a cat. Copy image address. And I pass that string here. So that way that's the starting value of this state. Okay. It's a long URL. Whatever. Maybe not that one. That's too long. Let's try this one. Copy image address. That's better. Okay. So now if I go to my page, we don't see the picture yet because I got to actually put it in there. But we're going to say an image tag. Source, because again, the source property determines what picture you see. And we're going to say that the source of the image is going to be that image state. Okay. And do we see the picture? I don't even see the buttons right now. Why is that? Oh, there we go, because the picture's just huge. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make sure that the picture doesn't get too big. So I'm going to say style equals object. And then we're just going to say width 200 pixels. There we go. Okay, so we can now see the picture. Cool. Okay, so we see the picture, it loads, but we want it to change based on an API call to HTTP cats. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it where there's a form input. Okay, so I'm going to just get rid of this state just to keep life simple. Okay, we're going to have a form input. We'll say type equals text. And image source type equals text. And then we'll have a button you can click on. Update picture. Okay, so there's our deal. It's complaining about something. Use states. Let's say, oh, okay, so I use this here. Let me get rid of all this now. We don't need all this. Okay. So just to kind of recap, there's the image of the cat, which is state, because again, we have a state called image. We have an input box, and the idea is you'll be able to put an input box, and you can put any of these like status codes, and it'll get you that status code cat. Okay, that's going to be sort of the game here. Cool. Now, in order to get the value from the form, I am going to use another hook. I'm not going to get too deep into this one, but useRef is going to allow me to create a variable that is that DOM element. So I'm just going to say const the input equals useRef null. You just declare null useRef, because that's just creating the ref. And then what you do is on the tag, you say ref equals input, the ref. And what that does, it stores the input, that input DOM node in this variable. So that way you can access it like you could access a DOM node in normal JavaScript. Okay, so that's going to allow me to have access to that. Cool. So what I want is the API call to happen when the page loads and whenever I want. So what I'm going to generally do is I'm going to create a function that's just like getCat. So I create a function to do the API call. Okay, so getCat. Although this is getCat, but getCat. Okay, and that's going to get the cat, and I'm just going to do a normal API call. Now here's the thing. I am going to use fetch. Fetch is built into the browser. Again, React is front-end run code, so I can use fetch and I don't have to download another library like Axios. I could download Axios, but I'll just use fetch. Okay, and to make my life easier, I'm going to make this an async function, so that way I can write my API fetching code much nicer. I can be like, you know, const response, the response from the API equals fetch, and then I put in the URL, which the URL is right up here. This is the URL. Now the thing is, see right here is where the status code goes. I need to figure out how to get that status code number in there. So I'm going to delete that part. I'm going to think, wait, where do I have that number? Oh yeah, I want people to type it in the form. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that form value. So we're going to just say, you know, status code. And that should have a const. Equals the input, because that's the ref. The way you get to the actual node is you go to input.current, and then again, inputs have a property of value that's like the actual, like what's on the form. So this will get me the value of what's on the form, save it in here, and then I can just add that to the end of the URL plus status code. So this is going to construct the URL that I want. Okay, and the way fetch works is that I get this initial response back, and I have to use the word await. So it basically says, hey, go get this stuff from this URL stored in this variable. Now when you use fetch, you don't get the final form right away. First you have to turn it into JSON. So then you take that response, and you have to do like response.json. It's always a two-step process with fetch, which is fine. And then JSONs are actually our actual data. Okay, we can even just call it data. Now, before I do anything else, I always just want to make sure that this is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console.log data. Just make sure that I'm actually getting what I think I'm getting. So if I go over here and I look, refresh. Right now, the first time it doesn't actually successful. Well, actually, I'm not using the function anywhere. So I have this function, but I'm not actually using it. So I should probably use it. Okay. So I'm going to refactor this just a little bit. I'm going to actually say here that we'll put the status code in here. It'll actually be a parameter, because I want it to happen once when the page first loads. So I'm going to put that in a useEffect. So useEffect. Again, the useEffect gets a function and an array. I only wanted it to happen once. I just wanted it to grab a random cat, or grab a cat the minute the page loads. So what we're going to do is we're going to say get cat, and then we'll start off with like a 304. Okay, and let's see if that works. Okay, I'm seeing some errors, so let's see why. Boo. Okay, and there's an issue too. See, I'm seeing HTTP cat undefined. HTTP cat undefined. So that's telling me it's not getting the right. But here's actually, I'm seeing it says 3.0, and this time it says 304. Okay, so let's refresh the page. Error failed. Okay, looks like it's because of cores. Okay, so unfortunately, they don't want to let me get access to the kitties. Okay, they're saying, nope, nope, you can't make an API call here. So that's unfortunate. Actually, but I think, well, so again, that's not has nothing to do with the code, but just to kind of illustrate the point, let's go to the JSON placeholder, because they always have fine working public endpoints. JSON placeholder, just waiting for it to load. Well, let's just do this. Random cat API. Just want an endpoint that gives me a random cat. Where can I just get a random cat? Voting various image upload. Okay, so we'll just basically do it with a random cat, so we won't worry about this whole status code thing. Keep it simple. Okay, so let's see what we get back. Let's see what we're getting there now. Oh, did I delete too much here? Yeah, I did. I should keep a parentheses here. And unexpected. Oh, did I put too many parentheses here? Yes. There we go. And see, here's the data we get back from the API. So see, it's an array. So I can see like it's an array with an object inside of it. And I go inside, there's one object. And then there's the picture. Okay, that's the picture I want. Okay. So that's what we want to do. So at that point, what we want to do is, again, that's going to be 0. So that's going to be 0 URL. 0 URL. So basically what we want to do is say, once we get the data, so again, at this point we got the data. Once we have the data, what I want to do is set the image state to data 0.url. And see, it sets that random image, because what happens is that I update the state, that changes the URL that this is pointing to, it re-renders the component, so now this image tag is going to have the new URL because that's the new value of image. Okay, and that's basic. And then again, I don't create an infinite loop of cats because I'm putting it in a useEffect, so it only happens once. And then I can trigger this again when we click the button. So I can just say, hey, on click, every time this button is clicked, you just get another cat. Okay, so now when I click update picture, I get a random cat every time. Because every time I do that, it's making the API call. It's running this function, which is making the API call, getting back all the data into this variable called data, and then I'm setting the state to that data, which updates the component, and this now reflects all the new data. Because again, if I go back to my DevTools and I take a look at app, see I have my state here, and every time I click on it, it updates. Okay, again, so basically, bottom line is always the pattern is I need to get my data, update my state, and then the update to state is what updates my UI. That's always the deal. But an API call, I don't want to create I may want to do the API call when the page loads, so that's when I would put it in a useEffect. I don't have to always put my API calls in useEffect. So notice here, I wrote the API call in a function, so that way I can call it at multiple times. And I said, okay, I want to happen once when the page loads. That time I put in the useEffect, but I also want it to happen anytime I click this button. So I used it again when the button's clicked. Okay. So again, another benefit of writing functions, I didn't have to write this logic twice. I wrote the logic for getting a cat once, and I can use it here to have it happen when the page loads, and then I can use it again here to happen when the button clicks. Cool. So that is, and then just another little fun things you can do, like on change, and we can just say, hey, we can get a cat every time you type in the box. So I'll put get cat here too. This is going to be kind of silly, but on change happens when you type in the box. So if I just type in like a keystroke, every time I do a keystroke, it's going to get me a random cat. Okay, that's kind of not useful, but just so you can see, like, you can connect anything to anything. The idea is just think through, like, what is the fundamental, like, experience. The idea is that I want to be able to see a cat. So, like, before I would have coded anything, I would have thought through, like, when the page loads, I want there to be a random cat. So whenever I think something that on page load, I'm going to think useEffect. Okay, something that has to happen once when the page loads, useEffect. Then we think I also want a random cat whenever I click a button. So then we think there's an on-click event on the button. And since they're in both situations they're doing the same thing, I'm going to create one function that does that thing, use it once in the useEffect, use it once in the onClick. So always think through the experience first. Like, what is the experience? Like, what is the user's experience? And then think about, like, what are the different patterns that replicate those pieces? And you'll find, like, a lot of this sort of design stuff a lot easier. But that's that. So hopefully you learned a few things. I kind of covered more than just like useEffect and making API calls. We had a little splash of useRef. We had a little splash of discussing how state works again. But I think it was all worthwhile. You may want to watch this video once or twice just to kind of absorb everything. But there was a lot to absorb, so yay. Have a great one. Enjoy.